Hello, and welcome to the STEMS Training Institute. My name is Mike Bricker, and today we're going to take a look at some things that you can do to help your patients and your family members and other people close to you to survive in this Coronapocalypse that has descended on us. I'm going to take a moment to share my screen. So, helping our patients to survive the Coronapocalypse. This is obviously a perfect storm for anxiety and for denial and relapse to substances and other addictive behaviors. So, how can we thrive in this chaos of disconnection? Well, first of all, some things about the virus itself. As we know, it was discovered in Wuhan, China in December of 2019. The technical name is SARS-CoV-2, which stands for Severe Acute Respiratory Syndrome Coronavirus 2. The scope of the problem. Well, if there's anything worse than the disease itself, it's the effect that it's had on all of us who aren't sick, or at least aren't sick yet. Particularly the impact on communities of color, Black, Indigenous, and people of color. The health and mental health systems have become so overloaded. And often these are folks who have the fewest economic resources to weather a problem like this. Okay, so what are we going to do? Well, here are 6 empowering strategies for individuals and families that may help you to cope. Dr. Brazius, who is the head of the World Health Organization, says, we cannot say loudly enough or clearly enough or often enough that all countries can still change the course of this pandemic. The problem, of course, is that countries don't change. People change. So what are the things that we can do? Well, let's put the serenity prayer into action by looking at the things I can control and the things that I can't. I can't control whether other people are going to wear a mask or follow the rules of social distancing. I can't control the amount of toilet paper that's available in the store. What I can control is my own attitude and the decisions that I choose to take in response to this. There are some things that I can do by limiting my exposure to social media, by conducting myself with grace and kindness with people around me. These are things that we can control. As Dr. Anthony Fauci has said, masks are an important component. The research has now established beyond a reasonable doubt that the wearing of masks protects both the mask wearer as well as the people that they come into contact with. Now, Jerome Adams, the US Surgeon General, recommends following the 3 W's. Wash your hands, watch your distance, and wear a mask. So as I mentioned before, the impact on our health system, our economy, our unemployment, our education and family life has been undeniably devastating and does fall disproportionately on communities of color. Perhaps more than anything else in recent memory, the twin dislocations of the pandemic and the wider awakening to the problems of systemic racism and systemic bias that are inherent in so many of our institutions. These things have really laid bare these tectonic fault lines which transect or cut through every area of our lives. Now, obviously, some prudent anxiety is warranted, but this relentless drumbeat of doom in the media may lead to deeper and more personal fears. The Coronapocalypse is accompanied by waves of anxiety, depression, and substance abuse. These are some data from June of 2020, looking at almost a 1/3 increase in symptom over baseline of symptoms of anxiety and depression, increased rates of substance abuse, people exhibiting trauma responses, and an uptick in suicides. Another thing, there has been a huge explosion of intimate partner violence as a result of this pandemic. In addition, this COVID-2 strikes at primal and subliminal evolutionary fears, the possibility of sudden death from something that we can neither see nor defeat. It's like being trapped in a horror movie all the time. Now, this primal fear triggers the autonomic fight or flight response, which floods the body with adrenaline and cortisol and other stress hormones. Ever since humankind began, this unconscious, or better yet, preconscious reflex has evolved to save us from immediate danger, like being chased by a bear. The problem is, the pandemic threat is not going away, and so neither does the cortisol. So it's like being chased by a bear all the time, waking or sleeping. There's no rest from the stress. So this long-term overactivation of the stress response system and the overexposure to cortisol and other stress hormones that follows disrupts almost all of our body's internal processes, which puts us at increased risk for many health problems, including, for us, obviously, anxiety, depression, and substance use, but also digestive problems and headaches, increased heart disease and sleep problems, weight gain. Cortisol convinces your body to turn incoming calories into adipose tissue or fat. The impact on autoimmune diseases like irritable bowel syndrome and rheumatoid arthritis are greatly increased, along with problems with concentration and memory. Another issue is the co-occurrence of major mental disorders along with substance abuse. And you combine that with poor supports, medical anxiety, and social isolation. It's a recipe for disaster. Researchers recently have been investigating what they call the COVID stress scales, which measure fears of contamination and danger, fears about economic consequences, disease-related xenophobia or fear of foreigners, compulsive checking and reassurance seeking, and traumatic stress symptoms that are brought on by the pandemic. By the way, there is a copy of the COVID stress scales that's available for free on the STEM's website. So we all know that chronic stress, meaning too much cortisol all the time, weakens the immune system by reducing the density of lymphocytes and helper T cells that are available to fight off infection. So paradoxically, this anxiety makes us more susceptible to the very threat that we're trying to avoid. This is a study of some of the impairments that are often caused by this. So in addition to the obvious impact of COVID-19, consider the combination of increased stress, social isolation, reduced access to treatment and recovery resources, alcohol and cannabis and gambling considered to be essential services, the loss of income, the loss of employment, grief over losses. Could there possibly be a more perfect storm for relapse? As we all know, addiction is a disease of isolation, so pandemic puts all of our recovery at risk. Another disastrous effect of this pandemic is the relative impact on what the CDC calls the social determinants of health. Existing inequalities in income and housing and access to health care, employment, food security, options for recovery, and social privilege, those existing inequalities are immensely magnified by the current crisis. This affects outreach to homeless people, to food pantries, shelters, needle exchange initiatives, access to naloxone and methadone maintenance, and many more social supports are disproportionately impacted by the pandemic. And this leaves people who were already economically disenfranchised and socially marginalized at greater risk for addiction and relapse, as well as infection by the virus. So people who are already predisposed to clinical depression and anxiety or personality disorders or trauma responses are now at even greater risk with even fewer resources. Even worse, Being isolated at home with an abusive family member can heighten the sense of urgency to escape in place with substances or other addictive behaviors. In fact, one consequence of the uptick in intimate partner violence and family violence is that since many schools are no longer in session physically, but have shifted to remote learning, and many medical clinics have postponed elective surgeries and things like child checks and scheduled immunizations until after the pandemic. There are fewer and fewer opportunities for mandatory reporters to have eyes on children and observe some of the dangers of abuse and neglect, and being able to support these children who are trapped at home. So the pandemic is a syndrome. A syndrome is a cluster of related symptoms. So if the pandemic's a syndrome, connection is the cure. So if disconnection and unconscious cortisols are the culprits, well, what's the solution? Well, anything that we can do to mindfully bring our nervous system back into the window of tolerance. The window of tolerance is kind of the Goldilocks zone. I'm alert and aware enough to be motivated, but I'm calm and centered enough to be effective. And inside that window of tolerance is the place where we can choose to respond instead of react. So the good news is there are a number of things that have been demonstrated by research to reduce serum cortisol and its effects on the body. So if this disconnection is the problem, the solution is to mindfully connect with our own inner power. We need to take responsibility for our own well-being and act for our own benefit and show others how to do the same. We can help them find new ways to reconnect with their sense of responsibility. How do we do that? Well, first of all, connect to the science. Follow the research and evaluate information carefully and critically. But doctors Facebook, Google, and Fox are not licensed to practice medicine in your state. So stick to the facts and reasonable assumptions. Logic and rational discourse reduce anxiety and stress. Sensationalism, uneducated guesswork, and deliberate disinformation do not. Secondly, connecting with ourselves through meditation and mindfulness exercises. Research has shown that mindfulness exercise and meditation reduce serum cortisol levels and the overall stress response. But most people, when we think about a meditative practice, we think about sitting for a couple of hours on a cushion and letting your mind go blank. Well, first of all, you can't do that. Your mind doesn't go blank when you meditate. It's impossible to think about not thinking about anything. But more importantly, research has demonstrated that 15 to 20 minutes seems to be about the sweet spot, because when we measure a reduction in serum cortisol levels, it takes more than 3 times as long to double the benefit of 15 to 20 minutes of meditation. Most of us can find enough time to do that in the course of a day. Connecting with our body. Physical exercise, movement meditations like yoga and Tai Chi and Qigong have been demonstrated to burn off adrenaline and cortisol and replace them with oxytocin and endogenous opioids. The same is true for regular aerobic exercise. Connecting with other people. Practicing social connection in spite of physical distancing. Being able to hug people, being able to shake hands and say hello. We certainly miss it. And it's really funny when we meet somebody, we stick out our hand to shake hands and then we kind of take it back. But here's the thing. The requisite 6 feet is less than the distance of a smile. And we can smile even with a mask. Research on the polyvagal theory by Stephen Porges has indicated that neuroception, which is the pre-conscious moment of connection, is determined more by the musculature around the eyes than by the mouth. So smile with your eyes. Connecting with other people. Social support has been demonstrated to reduce stress and promote healing. But now most of our social interactions are virtual. So choose to restrict your media diet of doom scrolling and instead choose to connect with people who are positive and hopeful. And now many peer support meetings like Alcoholics and Narcotics Anonymous, Refuge Recovery, which is a Buddhist approach to recovery, even the Red Road to Sobriety, the Wellbriety movement, have an online presence. And there are also many special interest Facebook groups. Connecting over video. It's almost as satisfying as being there in person. The auditory and visual conversational cues are intact. And as I mentioned, most peer recovery support meetings now have established an online presence. Connecting with pets. We have known for thousands of years that connecting with a loving pet has great soothing qualities. In isolation from other people, we get skin starved, and cuddling with a pet can be a delightful antidote. Connecting with nature. Take a walk, but walk mindfully. Stroll with all of your senses, being mindfully aware of the sounds and the sights and the smells and the sensation on your skin and the rhythm of your body as it connects with the ground of our being. As one Native American elder once told me, let the earth speak to your feet. Finally, and perhaps most important of all, connecting with all that there is. Take time to communicate with whatever it is that helps the universe make sense to you, whether you call it God or a higher power, the great mystery, or the spirit of humanity. As humans, we have an innate hunger for wonder that has to be nurtured. Okay, so what does all this have to do with preventing relapse? Well, perhaps it's worth taking a look through the other end of the binoculars. Merely preventing a resurgence of symptoms is like living in the hole of a donut. Okay, granted, the hole is important. If it doesn't have a hole, it isn't a donut. It's a fritter or it's something else. But that's ignoring the important part. Having a robust plan for ongoing recovery. The best solution might be to take all of the things that we've been talking about and begin weaving a basket of supports and building willfully and proactively a life that is happy, joyous, and free. Here are some resources that are available through the STEMS website. The first on the left is a fact sheet from the CDC. The second is a worksheet that we put together on coping with the anxiety that many people have as a result of this. That's based on an acronym like dialectical behavior therapy, but incorporating basic principles of acceptance and commitment therapy. Speaking of ACT, Dr. Russell Harris, who is a worldwide expert on acceptance and commitment therapy, has developed a longer and more comprehensive worksheet for dealing with the coronavirus that he calls Face COVID and breaks it down in a mnemonic the way that we do in DBT. You'll notice that he has graciously made this available on his website for reproduction for clinical use without violating copyright. Here are references for those of you who are interested in digging into this a little further. These are many of the references that were used to develop this training. Here is some information on myself and on the STEMS Institute. As I said, my name's Mike Bricker, and I'm the founder of the STEMS Training Institute. We began in 1984, and since then we have been offering the very latest in evidence-based and trauma-responsive practice, and also researching how to blend Western research-based treatment methodologies with other wisdom traditions. And so this is some contact information for how to get a hold of us. I really want to thank you for not just for taking the time to view this training, but also for the daily work that you do to bring hope, help, and healing to your patients. You truly are the heroes of healthcare. This is contact information. Again, as a NADAC approved education provider, we are able to provide contact hours which are used and accepted for certification and license renewal by most states and tribal governments. The STEMS Institute stands for Support Together for Emotional and Mental Serenity and Sobriety. Our main focus is helping people to turn co-occurring disorders into dual recovery. Here is more contact information, how to get a hold of us. I encourage you to contact us. And I want to thank you for taking the time to spend with us today. And I'm going to stop my sharing now. Thank you, and I hope to see you again.